Thomas was newly a street boy robbing shops and more. He stepped into the workhouse smelling the strong aroma of boy sweat, hearing the bangs and cries and the smacks of rulers on the table. For breakfast, he had old stale cereal with old chunky rotten milk. Dinner, pasta that wasn't cooked, tea, and old meat pie. At night time, he got in a box to sleep. No pillows, no duvet.
Ronnie suddenly heard a crash. At first he thought that it was nothing, but when he saw a silhouette, he stood that petrified. He looked like a cat about to jump on a mouse. Ronnie screamed until he found the kitchen, but there wasn't even a peep out of anyone. His ears were starting to ring. Ronnie was now determined to find a friend. He went into a room and slept in an uncomfortable box.
There was a little boy called Don. He was walking down a horrid hall. He was so scared that he thought the hall was possessed. Don stood still as his tears fell down his face. He was terrified. I felt so bad. So I went up to him. I got shouted at because the staff wanted to make him cry and uncomfortable. I said quietly, I have an empty bed next to me.
Harry anxiously stepped into the gloomy workhouse. He couldn't believe his eyes. He was terrified. He could hear the pots and pans clashing together in the smoky kitchen. Harry walked into this corridor. He was petrified. He could smell the aroma of horrible food.
Benjamin walked down the corridor in despair. The unexpected clank of the metal pots made him jump. It was so dark, after 20 steps he stood as still as a statue because he thought he was going to bang his head. He made a right turn and so scared he ran away, but staff dived to the ground and caught his heel.
Noah cautiously walked through the massive door. It looked like a prison cell. He got pushed by a tall man into a big scary room with lots of other children. He got out of his room and explored. When it was night, he crept back into the room. He didn't have any covers, pillows or bedsheet. It was just a box.
When Will slowly and anxiously walked into the workhouse, he felt to the corridor. He was scared as a lion's roar. He felt a cold breeze. He was traumatised. Then he saw the really extremely weird worker, the assistant. She was called Mrs. Sisson, screamed, "Who are you, boy?" "I'm Will," he stuttered. "Well, get to work," he screamed at him. Once he finished doing work, it was dark and late. One of the other ladies showed him to his tiny box and straight away went to sleep. Now everyone is asleep.
As Lucas slowly crept down the old dungy corridor, he heard the terrifying snap of the blunt scissors. Someone snatched him aside and started chopping off his hair. "No, not my precious hair," Lucas said. "Too late now," Boy Old Head answered. As soon as he was out of one terrifying room, he saw another. This time it had children getting spanked. What would he do? How would he get out of this place?
Jimmy stepped into the workhouse frightenedly. As he walked through the corridor anxiously, he could smell the sweat of the boys and could hear banging from the kitchen. Then he went in his room. Then Mr. Sisson slammed the door. He went in his box, but he couldn't sleep because he kept on hearing the squeak of the mice. What is going to happen next?
Charlie slowly and nervously sneaked in as if he was robbing a bank. He was terrified seeing all the hungry, sick people. There were spiders everywhere and all the boys had no hair. Charlie was scared and petrified. There were people sticking out their greasy and gloomy hands saying, "Help, please." I felt sorry for Charlie. He could hear children wailing really loud. There was banging on doors because they missed their families. He could hear all the crashing everywhere. Charlie's eyes started to fill up.
Henry walked nervously down the creepy corridor. He came to the hall door. When he opened it, the door made a loud creak. Mrs. Sisson walked up to him. She took him to his box. While they walked through the dark, dingy corridors, Henry could hear other boys weeping. When he got to his box, he froze, and in his mind, he really, really wanted to go home. When he got in his box, he started to think about his parents. He wished they were still alive.
Leo slowly walked in the workhouse anxiously. While he was walking down the corridor, he could hear loud banging and doors slamming. It was that dark he couldn't see. When he got closer to a light, he turned the lights on. The staff that selfishly couldn't be bothered looking.
Timmy was anxiously walking through the dark, gloomy corridor. He could hear children crying. He was petrified. People had been telling him all about the workhouse, but he didn't realise how bad it was. The staff behind him was pushing him and laughing like a witch. It was terrifying. He was trying to stop, but he couldn't. The staff behind him would push him again if he tried to stop. Crash! Things were dropping from children trying to escape. Timmy already knew how bad the workhouse was.
Bob anxiously walked down the gloomy corridor. He heard a bang. He jumped up in shock. I felt sorry for him because he had no friends and the staff were being rude. He got escorted to his box. It was time for a cold shower. After that, he got changed into rough and itchy clothes and supervised back to his box. In the night, he could hear the screams and cries of young and old boys.
Jack nervously walked down the hallway. It was dark and cold. The lights flickered. As quick as a flash, night fell. He was lay in a box shivering. His tears froze to his face. He could barely sleep. There was rat poo and wig in his box. He heard rats scratching at the walls.
Thomas creaked quietly down the gloomy hallway. He had heard the bash of the big black gate. He then entered the lunch hall and said, "What is this? It tastes like tyres. Why is it so rough?" Mrs. Sisson then replied, "What did you say, you little maggot?" Thomas then answered, "You heard me."
The door creaked open as he walked down the frightening corridor. Lewis was petrified. The lights suddenly turned off as he thought to himself, "I want to go home. I wish my family was still here with me." The rooms were like a death trap.
Noah nervously walked down the dark corridor quietly. He felt petrified. An old woman with wrinkles pulled him aside. He stomped up the stairs and then saw the boxes. He stood like a statue. He said, "I'm really in one of these boxes, really?" From the pipes, little drops of water fell onto the floor like someone actually fell. He started crying. I felt really sorry for Noah.
Jack nervously took a step into the corridor. He was stunned. It was very gloomy and all the people were sad. He could also hear lots of coughing because of all the illnesses. Soon after he met Jack. He was very anxious because there was lots of banging and crying everywhere.
James arrived at the gates. They slowly creaked open. As James walked down the short path to the corridor, he saw children sat frozen on the windowsill of a dirty window. A woman opened the door and James was stopped in his tracks. The corridor was more terrible than he could ever imagine. He started to walk down the corridor. At that very moment, his mind was going through phases of throwing up, getting whipped or people throwing up.
As Bob was walking down the corridor, he felt petrified. The cold, dark corridor was as silent as a mouse. Bob heard people coming. When he heard it, his heart was beating very, very fast.
As soon as David entered the corrupted hallway, he stood still. The hallway looked endless. At every door he stood as if a hand would pop out of the pure darkness. After every step there was a silent creak. He tiptoed tensiously as he whispered, "Get me out of here." He joined his hands and prayed to be home again. Still stuttering, he finally got to his room.
Ben slowly walked into the workhouse without any greeting. He anxiously walked down into the dark corridor. It looked like the walls were closing in on him. I felt so bad for him, the staff were so rude. A loud bang from the kitchen petrified poor Ben. He wailed and wept like an injured dog.
Arthur was limping down the deep dark corridors, frightened about the weak rusty walls. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The gates were scraping like a lion scratching its prey open. The children were begging for mercy. Nobody could move a muscle. It was like the deadly musical statues.
Brandon walked slowly to the corridor. He felt terrified. The cold, dark walls felt like they were closing in. Brandon was freezing. His hands felt like ice. He could hear the screams of children crying. He almost started crying himself.